You have $10,000, two choices: investment. A pays you 5% a year in cash, like clockwork. Investment B pays you almost nothing, but it grows faster. 20 years from now, one of these choices leaves you significantly richer. Which one? Don't answer yet, because dividend yield can make a weak investment look safe, right before it isn't. Dividend income feels powerful. You watch cash land in your account, quarter after quarter, and it feels like proof that your money is working. It's visible, it's predictable, and it feels earned. But income and wealth creation are not the same thing, and mixing them up is one of the most expensive mistakes an otherwise careful investor can make. Let's be clear from the start, this is not an anti-dividend video. Dividends can be a smart, legitimate, even essential part of a well-built portfolio. What we're doing here is comparing growth and dividend investing honestly, using real compounding math, real tax rules, valuation logic, and risk, not slogans from either side of the debate. But before we can compare the two strategies fairly, you need to understand one basic fact about how dividends actually work, because almost nobody explains it correctly. Reality check. Dividends are not free money. Picture a hypothetical $100 stock that pays a $4 annual dividend. That $4 doesn't appear from nowhere. It comes out of the company's own assets, cash that economically already belonged to shareholders, just sitting inside the business instead of their brokerage account. So when that stock goes ex-dividend, meaning the cutoff date after which new buyers no longer receive that payment, its price is expected, all else equal, to adjust downward by roughly the dividend amount. That's not a market punishing the stock, it's simple accounting. The company is worth slightly less because it just sent cash out the door. In the real world, normal daily price swings from news, earnings, or broader market moves often hide this adjustment completely, so most investors never notice it happening in real time. But the underlying mechanism is still there, quietly working in the background every time a dividend is paid. And here's the part that actually matters for your decision-making. Getting a cash deposit simply feels different from watching a number on a screen go up, even when the underlying economics are identical. That difference is psychological, not financial, and it's exactly the gap that leads investors to overvalue yield without ever asking what that yield is actually made of. The number that matters more than yield. The number that actually determines your wealth is called total return. Capital appreciation plus any distributions, combined. Here's a simple hypothetical. Investment. A pays a 1% dividend and appreciates 9% a year. Investment B pays a 5% dividend and appreciates 3% a year. Add them up. Investment A returns 10% total. Investment B returns 8% total. Investment A wins, even though it paid almost no dividend at all. Yield only tells you how the return was delivered to you. Total return tells you how much wealth was actually created. So here's the question that should be bothering you right now. What happens when a stock's yield rises for all the wrong reasons? The high yield trap. Let's go back to that hypothetical $100 stock. It pays $5 a year, a clean 5% yield. Now suppose the business runs into trouble and the share price falls to $60, while the dividend, for now, stays the same. Do the math. $5 divided by $60 is about 8.3%. The yield just jumped from 5% to 8.3%, but nothing got better. The price collapsed, and yield is just dividend divided by price, so a shrinking denominator inflates the number automatically. This is where investors need to slow down and look for warning signs. Weakening cash flow, rising debt, an industry being disrupted, or a market that's quietly pricing in a future dividend cut. A high yield isn't automatically dangerous. Sometimes it's a genuine bargain, but sometimes it's a business breaking down in slow motion, and the yield is the last thing to notice. The double hit, dividend cut plus price decline. Here's the scenario that makes high-yield investing genuinely risky. Imagine a hypothetical $20,000 position yielding 8%, generating $1,600 a year in income. Then the company cuts its dividend in half. Income drops to $800. At the same time, the stock price falls 30%, so that $20,000 position is now worth $14,000. You didn't just lose income, you lost income and principal at the same time from the same underlying weakness. This isn't inevitable. Plenty of dividend payers never go through this. It's the risk of buying a yield number without understanding the business standing behind it. Why growth companies keep the cash. Now flip to the other side of the argument. Picture a hypothetical company earning $1 billion a year. It has a choice to make. It could pay out $700 million of that to shareholders as dividends, letting each investor decide what to do with their share. Or it could reinvest that $700 million into new products, technology, expansion, or acquisitions, betting that the business itself can turn that capital into something bigger. This decision is called capital allocation, and it's one of the most important things a management team does. Retained earnings only create value if management can actually reinvest that cash at attractive returns, turning $700 million into something that generates meaningfully more than $700 million in future profit. If they can't, that retained cash just sits there, or worse, gets wasted on a low-return acquisition. So keeping the cash isn't automatically the smarter move. It's only smarter if leadership actually knows what to do with it. The real question was never dividend or no dividend. It's who's better at growing this dollar, the shareholder holding it, or the company reinvesting it. The growth stock trap. Here's the surprise reversal. Growth investors can make mistakes that are every bit as costly as chasing a bad dividend. A company can grow revenue 20% a year and still turn out to be a disappointing investment if investors paid an excessive price to own that growth in the first place. There's a real difference between buying a great company and making a great stock purchase. If a stock's price already assumes years of flawless execution, then even genuinely excellent results can produce weak returns, because the bar was set too high before you ever bought in. Growth without discipline about price is just a different flavor of the same mistake. The $10,000 compounding test. Let's answer the question from the hook. Take that hypothetical $10,000 and compound it for 20 years, reinvesting everything, ignoring taxes and fees for this illustration. At an 8% annualized total return, it grows to roughly $46,600. At a 10% annualized total return, it grows to roughly $67,300. That's a gap of about $20,700. Almost double the original investment, created entirely by a 2-point difference in total return. Notice something important. Nothing in that math mentions dividend stock or growth stock. The gap was created by total return alone. Whether that return came wrapped in a dividend check or in pure price appreciation never mattered to the math at all. The tax reality check. Here's a piece most dividend conversations skip entirely. In a taxable brokerage account, dividends can create a tax bill in the year you receive them, even if you turn around and reinvest every single dollar right back into the same stock. The IRS doesn't care that you never actually spent the cash. The income still happened. Qualified dividends and non-qualified dividends are often taxed differently, at different rates, and holding those same investments inside a tax-advantaged retirement account, like an IRA or 401k, can change this picture substantially, sometimes eliminating that immediate tax drag altogether. Now compare that to a low-dividend growth investment sitting in a taxable account. Capital gains generally aren't taxed until you actually sell, which means you, not the calendar, decide when that tax bill arrives. That difference is often called tax drag, and while it can sound small on paper, even a modest annual drag compounding over 20 or 30 years can quietly erode a meaningful chunk of your final wealth. None of this is a reason to avoid dividends altogether. It's a reason to know exactly which account you're holding them in and what that means for your bottom line. The $100,000 test. Let's scale this up. Take a hypothetical $100,000 portfolio compounding for 20 years. At a 7% annualized total return, it grows to roughly $387,000. At a 9% annualized total return, it grows to roughly $560,000. That's a difference of about $173,000 from just 2 percentage points of total return, sustained over 2 decades. And once again, nothing about those numbers tells you which portfolio had the higher dividend yield. Ending wealth comes down to total return, shaped by valuation, business quality, capital allocation, risk, taxes, fees, and, very often underestimated, investor behavior. Why dividends can still be powerful now for the strongest fair case for dividends? Because this video isn't trying to talk anyone out of them. Seeing real cash land in your account can build genuine investing discipline. It's tangible. It's motivating. And for many people, it makes staying invested through a rough, scary market noticeably easier than watching an unrealized loss on a growth stock with nothing coming in to show for it. Automatic dividend reinvestment programs remove decision-making from the process entirely, quietly buying more shares every quarter without you having to lift a finger or time the market. And for investors who want ongoing, predictable cash flow from their portfolio without the discomfort of manually selling shares, dividends serve a real, practical, psychologically comfortable purpose. Of course, dividends are never guaranteed. Companies can reduce or suspend them the moment conditions get difficult, and history is full of examples. But there's a behavioral truth worth respecting here. An investor who sticks faithfully with a good enough dividend strategy for 20 straight years will often out-earn a more theoretically optimal investor who keeps jumping between whatever strategy looks best this particular year. Time horizon changes the equation. Consider 3 hypothetical investors, one at 25, one at 45, one at 65. This isn't about age dictating a formula. It's about what age often correlates with time horizon, income needs, and risk capacity. A 25-year-old with decades ahead may lean toward long-term compounding growth, since there's time to ride out volatility. A 45-year-old is often balancing continued growth with a growing need for stability. A 65-year-old may prioritize reliable cash flow and careful management of withdrawals during market downturns. But these are patterns, not rules. Individual goals, other income sources, and personal risk tolerance can shift any of this considerably. You don't need dividends to create income. Imagine a hypothetical $1 million portfolio and a need to spend $40,000 a year, roughly a 4% withdrawal rate, a figure often used as a starting point in retirement planning. One investor structures their entire portfolio to generate that full $40,000 purely from dividends. Another investor holds a mix of growth and dividend-paying assets, collects a smaller dividend amount, and systematically sells some appreciated shares to make up the difference. This second approach is called a total return withdrawal strategy, and it isn't automatically worse. It simply works differently, drawing income from both distributions and growth rather than distributions alone. One real risk worth naming clearly here is sequence of returns risk. Withdrawing money during a market downturn early in retirement can do outsized, lasting damage to a portfolio's longevity, regardless of whether that withdrawn money came from selling shares or from collecting dividend checks. Neither approach magically eliminates that risk. A dividend-only portfolio concentrated in struggling sectors can face its own version of the same problem. Selling shares for income is not inferior to living off dividends by default. Both strategies depend heavily on portfolio structure, tax treatment, diversification, and market conditions at the time money is needed. 5 questions before buying a dividend stock. If you remember only one practical section from this entire video, make it this one. 1. Is free cash flow actually supporting the dividend? A dividend paid from real, ongoing cash flow is sustainable. A dividend paid from borrowed money or asset sales is a countdown clock. 2. Is the company's debt manageable? Heavy debt competes directly with shareholders for the company's cash, and in a downturn, debt payments get made first. 3. Is the payout ratio sustainable? If a company is paying out nearly all of its earnings as dividends, there's little cushion left if business conditions weaken. 4. Can earnings and cash flow continue growing over time? A dividend frozen at today's level slowly loses purchasing power. Growing earnings are what let a dividend grow too. 5. Would you still want to own this business if it paid a 0% dividend? This is the real test. If the honest answer is no, you're not investing in the company. You're chasing the income. And that's a very different, much riskier decision. 5 questions before buying a growth stock. 1. Is the growth profitable or moving towards sustainable profitability? Growth funded by piling up losses is fragile in a way that profitable growth simply isn't. 2. Can management reinvest capital effectively? Fast revenue growth means little if that growth doesn't translate into real, lasting value. 3. Does the company have a durable competitive advantage? Something has to protect that growth rate from competitors chasing the same opportunity. 4. How much future growth is already priced into the stock? If years of perfect execution are already baked into today's price, even a great company can be a poor purchase. 5. Would you still own it if the price went nowhere for 3 years while the business kept improving? That answer separates a long-term owner from someone chasing momentum. The final verdict: growth versus dividends. So which one wins? Growth or dividends? Neither, universally. And anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you a slogan instead of an answer. A dividend-paying company can outperform a non-dividend growth stock over a given decade. A growth stock can outperform a dividend payer just as easily over that same stretch. Which one wins flips constantly, depending on total return, starting valuation, business quality, capital allocation decisions, risk taken on, taxes owed, and, just as importantly, what you personally need your money to actually do for you. Most diversified funds, including many ordinary index funds, already hold a blend of both growth-oriented and dividend-paying businesses inside the same portfolio, which means, for most investors, this was never really an either-or decision in the first place. It was a false choice dressed up as a debate. The last reality check. So, should you stop buying dividend stocks? No. You should stop buying dividend stocks just because they pay dividends. That single habit, more than almost anything else, is what quietly turns a reasonable income strategy into a hidden risk. A dividend is a feature of an investment. It is not, by itself, a complete investment thesis. Remember that $60 stock still paying its old $5 dividend and the 8.3% yield that looked like a gift and wasn't. Remember the $20,700 gap and then the $173,000 gap, created by nothing more than total return quietly compounding in the background. None of it had anything to do with a label. Don't buy the dividend. Buy the business, because over 20 years, your wealth won't respond to what your portfolio is called. It responds to total results. Here's my question for you. If you had $100,000 to invest for the next 20 years, would you choose growth stocks, dividend stocks, or a mix of both? And why? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this kind of evidence-based investing breakdown is useful to you, like the video and subscribe. There's a lot more of this coming.